The lecture hall buzzed with chatter and shuffling papers as the human trainee stepped inside. Her backpack slung over one shoulder and a notebook clutched tightly in her hand. The rows were packed with people, already seated, heads bent over notebooks or laptops, talking quietly among themselves. She had hoped to find a spot near the front, where she could see the board clearly and be part of the discussion. But as her eyes scanned the crowded rows, her heart sank. Every chair seemed taken, every space accounted for, and for a moment she froze at the doorway, unsure if she should step forward or quietly leave. Anxiety bubbled up in her chest, a mix of nervousness and embarrassment, and she could feel the weight of all eyes turning slightly toward her, some curious, some indifferent. Her stomach tightened, and she took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing thoughts. She thought about asking someone to move over, but the murmured conversations and quick glances made her feel like an outsider, like she did not belong in this small, shared space. Each passing second felt heavier as she waited, her hope fading a little more with every occupied seat she passed by. The noise of the hall seemed to grow louder in her ears, the scratching of pens on paper, the quiet laughter from the corners, the soft cough saw reminding her that she was alone and had nowhere to sit. She hesitated, shifting from foot to foot, feeling both visible and invisible at the same time, as if her presence was noticed but unwelcome. Her hands gripped her notebook tighter, and she glanced down the rows again, searching for a small gap, a space that might have been overlooked. But every gap seemed tiny, filled with bags or jackets, and every attempt to approach a seat seemed impossible. She imagined leaving, walking back out, and sitting somewhere else. But the thought of missing the lecture, of not being part of the day's learning, made her heart sink further. At that moment, she felt the full weight of being overlooked, the subtle sting of exclusion, and the creeping embarrassment of having to stand there in front of so many people who were already settled comfortably. She could feel a mix of disappointment and frustration rising in her, but along with it, a quiet determination to not let the crowded room defeat her. Even in her nervousness, she straightened her back and held her notebook closer, scanning the hall once more, hoping, almost desperately, that someone would make room for her. She did not yet know that help, or unexpected kindness, was closer than she thought, waiting to appear in a way that would change the rest of her day and leave a memory she would never forget. She took a tentative step forward, her voice soft, as she politely asked if anyone could make room for her, hoping for even the smallest sign of kindness. "Excuse me, is there space here?" she asked, glancing at the nearest row of seats, her hand gently resting on her notebook as if for courage. For a moment, the chatter slowed slightly, but no one immediately moved to help. Instead, she received murmured responses and sideways glances that made her feel like she was invisible, as if her presence had gone unnoticed, or, worse, unwelcome. A quiet sting of disappointment spread through her chest, mixing with embarrassment, and she felt her shoulders slump slightly. Every second she lingered, waiting for a friendly gesture, seemed to stretch longer, and the murmurs around her sounded sharper in her mind. She could sense people shifting slightly in their seats, whispering to each other, glancing at her for a brief moment before looking away, and the subtle exclusion pressed against her heart like an invisible weight. Her eyes scanned the room again, hoping maybe someone would kindly offer an empty space or scoot over. But every face she met quickly looked back to their own notes or conversations, and the hope that had sparked in her chest flickered like a candle in the wind. She felt a sudden, uncomfortable isolation, surrounded by people, but alone, standing at the doorway while the rest of the lecture hall seemed settled into their own worlds. Her stomach twisted, not from hunger, but from the emotional sting of rejection, and for the first time that morning, she considered stepping back, leaving the hall entirely, and sitting somewhere else where she wouldn't feel like an intruder. Yet even in that disappointment, there was a quiet resilience within her. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that being ignored did not define her worth or her right to be there. She tried to straighten her posture, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder, telling herself she had every right to learn and to be present, no matter how crowded the room seemed. But the murmured responses, the faint laughter from a corner, and the sideways glances kept her hesitation alive, and she quietly stepped back, unsure of what to do next. Her heart was heavy with the realization that not everyone would be welcoming, yet a small flicker of hope remained, that perhaps someone, somewhere, might offer her a hand, a gesture of understanding or inclusion. She lingered near the doorway, torn between leaving and waiting, each passing moment stretching out with suspense, not knowing if the lecture would begin before a solution appeared, or if she would be left standing on her own, witnessing the world move forward without her. And in that quiet uncertainty, she realized that even small acts of kindness could change the course of her day, and she held on to that thought, unsure that she would need it sooner than she expected. From the corner of her eye, she noticed 3 cubs sitting together in a small cluster, their heads bent slightly toward each other, as if sharing a secret. They were young and small, their expressions alert and curious, and something about the way they looked at her made her pause. Their eyes, bright and observant, seemed to notice more than the casual chatter around them. They noticed her standing alone, hesitant at the doorway, clutching her notebook with quiet unease, their heads tilted ever so slightly, a subtle gesture that made her feel seen, even amidst the crowd of indifferent peers. The 3 cubs whispered softly among themselves, low enough that she could not hear their words, but she could sense the careful thought behind every glance and movement. The way they exchanged subtle nods and gestures suggested a quiet understanding, as if they recognized that she needed help without anyone having to explain. She felt a mix of surprise and relief wash over her, the tight knot of anxiety in her chest loosening slightly, because their attention felt intentional, kind, and unspoken. It was not just that they noticed her, they seemed to care, in the small, thoughtful way that children often can, before the complications of the world dull that instinct. She watched as one of the cubs shifted slightly in their seat, moving a small backpack a little to the side, and another adjusted their notebook, as if making space without any announcement. Even the smallest motions, the way they leaned slightly toward her line of sight, communicated a quiet awareness that no words could have expressed. In that moment, she realized that sometimes help does not come with fanfare. It comes in the soft, subtle gestures of those willing to see you, to recognize your need, and to respond without being asked. The lecture hall around her continued to hum with low conversation, the murmur of pens scratching paper, and the occasional cough or shuffle of feet. But her attention was drawn entirely to the 3 cubs. They did not call her over. They did not interrupt the lecture. Yet their presence alone sent a signal of inclusion, of empathy, that reached her like a gentle touch. She took a small, steadying breath, noticing for the first time that her hope, which had begun to fade with the earlier rejection, was returning. The cubs, small and attentive, had created a quiet space in the midst of the crowded hall, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sense that perhaps she would not have to face the lecture alone after all. Their quiet observation, their thoughtful gestures, and the care in their attention became a beacon of reassurance, and she realized that sometimes, when the world seemed to close doors, unexpected allies could appear in the most unassuming forms, watching, waiting, and ready to act in ways that spoke louder than words ever could, without uttering a single word. The 3 cubs began to move in quiet, deliberate motions, each small gesture carrying an unspoken purpose. One gently shifted a stack of notebooks to the side, making a narrow but usable space, while another nudged a backpack slightly forward, creating more room for someone else to sit comfortably. The 3rd cub leaned over, adjusting the corner of a notebook, aligning it neatly against the desk, so that the row looked open and welcoming, yet still orderly. Their movements were coordinated almost instinctively, as if each of them understood the unspoken message that someone needed a place, and it was their responsibility to make it available. The human trainee, standing a few steps away, noticed the subtle changes in the row of seats, her heart lifting with a quiet sense of hope she hadn't felt since entering the hall. She watched as the cubs exchanged brief, meaningful glances, their faces calm but focused, a silent communication that seemed to say, "We've got this. It's okay. You can come." No words were spoken, no announcements made, but the gesture itself spoke volumes, and the clarity of their intent made the moment feel almost magical in its simplicity. Other students continued their own conversations and note-taking, unaware of the small act of kindness unfolding beside them, but for the woman, it was impossible to miss. She felt a warmth spreading in her chest, a mixture of surprise, gratitude, and relief, realizing that in the midst of a crowded, indifferent lecture hall, someone these young cubs had noticed her, recognized her struggle, and quietly stepped forward to help, without any need for recognition or applause. It was a simple act, yet deliberate in its care, and in that deliberate simplicity, it carried a weight far greater than any spoken words could have conveyed. She took a hesitant step closer, her eyes meeting the slight, encouraging smiles of the cubs, and felt a wave of reassurance that settled the tight knot of anxiety she had carried since walking in. The lecture hall, once a place of tension and uncertainty, now felt lighter, infused with the quiet power of empathy and understanding. Each small adjustment, the shifting of notebooks, the careful nudging of bags, the tiny rearrangement of chairs, formed a message stronger than any sentence. "You belong here. You have a place with us." The human trainee's nervousness began to ease, replaced by a growing sense of inclusion, and she understood that sometimes the most meaningful help is not announced or celebrated, but given quietly, intentionally, and with thoughtfulness. In that moment, the three cubs transformed a simple row of seats into a space of welcome and safety, showing that even small, silent gestures could create a profound impact on someone's day, and perhaps on their entire sense of belonging. She took another step forward, her chest lighter, ready to join them, carrying with her a renewed belief in human kindness and the unexpected allies who sometimes appear when they are needed most. The woman's eyes widened as she took in the row of seats that had suddenly opened up before her, a space that had been carefully cleared by the three attentive cubs. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, she felt as if she were witnessing something almost magical. One of the cubs, small and thoughtful, raised a hand and gestured gently toward the empty chairs, a silent invitation that carried more warmth than any spoken words could convey. The motion was simple, barely noticeable to anyone else in the lecture hall, yet to her, it was a powerful signal that she was welcome, that she had been seen and acknowledged in a way she had not expected. She hesitated, her mind racing with disbelief, unsure if this act of kindness was truly meant for her. Could it really be that, in the middle of a crowded, indifferent room, someone had noticed her struggle and gone out of their way to make space? Her chest tightened with emotion, a mix of surprise, gratitude, and relief, and she felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. Slowly, she took a cautious step forward, her gaze flicking back to the cubs, as if to reassure herself that this moment was real. Each step felt lighter than the one before, her heart warming with every inch she moved closer to the cleared row. The cubs watched quietly, their heads tilted slightly, their eyes calm and encouraging, conveying patience and understanding. There was no rush, no pressure, just a quiet support that made her feel safe and included. As she neared the seats, she noticed the little details they had thought of. The notebooks shifted neatly, backpacks pushed aside, and a small space left exactly where she could sit comfortably. The thoughtfulness of the gesture struck her deeply, and she realized that inclusion did not always come with loud gestures or words. Sometimes it arrived quietly, intentionally, and with genuine care. She slid into the seat, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. as if the anxiety and tension she had carried since entering the lecture hall had melted away in an instant. The cubs smiled softly, one of them nodding just slightly, a gesture that made her smile in return, and in that simple exchange, a sense of connection blossomed. She felt seen, accepted, and a part of something bigger, a small but meaningful community of peers who had reached out in an unexpected way. Around them, the lecture hall continued its usual rhythm of whispers, note-taking, and soft movement, yet for her, the room had transformed. It was no longer a place of exclusion and hesitation. It had become a space of welcome, empathy, and human kindness. In that moment, she understood that sometimes, the smallest gestures, a shifted notebook, a nudged backpack, a silent hand guiding you forward, could carry the largest messages, teaching lessons about care, compassion, and the unexpected ways humans can support one another. She eased into the cleared row, letting out a quiet sigh of relief as she finally found a place to sit, her heart still beating a little faster from the nervous anticipation she had carried since entering the hall. The cubs beside her smiled softly, small gestures of encouragement and acceptance that seemed to radiate warmth and reassurance. For the first time that day, she felt truly noticed, not just acknowledged, but seen as someone worthy of space and attention in the crowded room. The weight of anxiety that had pressed on her shoulders since the doorway began to lift, replaced by a gentle sense of inclusion that filled her with calm. As she arranged her notebook and backpack on the desk in front of her, she glanced at the cubs again, noticing the subtle nods and tiny smiles that communicated understanding and kindness without a single word being spoken. The atmosphere around her seemed to shift slightly, as if the presence of thoughtful gestures could influence not just her mood, but the energy of the space itself. She felt a sense of safety in the way the cubs had made room for her, a reassurance that she could focus on the lecture without fear of being ignored or excluded. Her hands relaxed, no longer gripping her notebook so tightly, and she allowed herself to look around, taking in the lecture hall with new eyes. What had once felt like an intimidating, crowded space now felt welcoming, alive with the quiet power of empathy and human connection. She realized that inclusion could come from the smallest actions, the simplest acts of thoughtfulness, and that sometimes people who might seem young or unassuming could demonstrate the most genuine forms of kindness. As the lecture began, she felt a growing sense of belonging. Each word from the instructor and each glance at her new companions reinforcing that she was now part of the learning environment in a way she hadn't expected that morning. The cubs shifted slightly to accommodate her, leaning in just enough to offer her space without disturbing their own focus. A subtle choreography of care that reminded her that respect and thoughtfulness are often more meaningful than spoken compliments or dramatic gestures. In that moment, she understood that human connection is built not just through words, but through attention, patience, and small acts of consideration that communicate awareness and empathy. She glanced at the cubs once more, silently thanking them for noticing her, for acting without hesitation, and for offering a place in the midst of a crowded room. A quiet sense of gratitude settled over her, mingling with pride for her own courage in stepping forward to accept their kindness. For the first time that day, she felt not only relief, but genuine respect, both for herself and for the people who had chosen to make her feel welcome. In that quiet, unassuming moment, the room felt different, brighter, and filled with the promise that sometimes, even in unexpected ways, the simplest gestures of human care can make someone feel truly seen and valued. As the lecture began, the woman felt the room settle into a rhythm of focused attention and quiet scribbling of notes, but she was keenly aware of the presence of the three cubs beside her. Without speaking aloud, they leaned slightly toward her, sharing small hints, quick notes, or gentle gestures that guided her understanding of the lecture without drawing attention. One of the cubs nudged a page of their notebook toward her when the instructor mentioned a key point, while another softly pointed to a diagram ensuring she could follow along. Their careful attentiveness made her feel supported in a way that went beyond just physical space. It was emotional, reassuring, and deeply human, she realized, with a mix of surprise and gratitude. That true allies do not always announce themselves or make their presence obvious. They quietly show up when someone needs them, often in ways that are subtle but profoundly meaningful. The more she noticed their thoughtfulness, the more her own confidence grew. She began to write down notes more freely, ask questions mentally, and immerse herself in the lecture, feeling less like an outsider and more like a valued participant in the learning environment. Each small gesture from the Cubs, a shared pencil, a slight shift of a notebook, a meaningful glance communicated the same message over and over. You belong here. You are seen. You are supported. The woman felt a warmth in her chest, a soft glow of reassurance that this small act of camaraderie had given her a sense of belonging she had not expected when she first entered the hall. Around her, the lecture continued with its normal rhythm, but for her, the experience had transformed. It was no longer just a classroom. It was a space of inclusion, of quiet understanding, and of human connection that transcended words. The attentiveness of the Cubs made her feel like part of a small community, and in that shared space, the earlier moments of hesitation and embarrassment began to fade into memory. She realized that belonging is not always about being loudly accepted or publicly recognized. Sometimes it is found in the gentle, unspoken acts of care that others extend without expectation or acknowledgement. She noticed herself smiling softly as she glanced at the Cubs, feeling gratitude but also a deep respect for their awareness and empathy. This moment taught her that support can take many forms, that sometimes the smallest gestures have the largest impact, and that kindness often speaks louder than any words. The lecture continued, the instructor's voice weaving knowledge into the room, but for her, the most powerful lesson was already unfolding right beside her, the lesson of quiet loyalty, genuine attentiveness, and the human capacity to make others feel included simply through thoughtful presence. By the time the lecture reached its midpoint, she was no longer the nervous, hesitant trainee who had entered the hall. She was someone who felt connected, understood, and respected, carried forward not by grand announcements, but by the steady, caring gestures of her unexpected allies, the three attentive Cubs who had silently changed her entire experience of the day. During the short break, the woman felt a quiet warmth spreading in her chest as she turned toward the three Cubs, who had quietly made room for her in the crowded lecture hall. She smiled, her gratitude rising like a gentle tide, and said softly, "Thank you for everything." The Cubs looked at her with calm, modest expressions, shrugging lightly as if to say it had been nothing, though their eyes held a deep and genuine warmth that made her heart swell with appreciation. There was no need for grand gestures or exaggerated words. Their simple acknowledgement, the quiet way they had acted to include her, spoke louder than anything else could. She felt a connection forming, fragile, yet strong, a human bond that seemed to transcend the noise and busyness of the room. Their small act of kindness, which at first had seemed so simple, a cleared row of seats, a gentle gesture, attentive guidance had created ripples that reached far beyond the moment itself. As she looked at them, she noticed the care in their movements, the way they had remained attentive to her without making her feel obligated, embarrassed, or uncomfortable. The realization hit her that these gestures, these subtle choices to act with thoughtfulness, had brightened her entire day and had shifted her sense of the lecture hall from a place of anxiety and exclusion to a space of understanding and warmth. She could feel a quiet sense of calm and trust settling over her as she sat with them, noticing small smiles and glances that reassured her she was not alone. The Cubs, though young and seemingly unassuming, had demonstrated an awareness and empathy that often eludes adults, and she felt both amazed and humbled by their quiet courage and attentiveness. In that brief break, The woman allowed herself to reflect on the human power of kindness, understanding, and connection, realizing that even a single thoughtful act can lift the weight of isolation and nervousness from someone's heart. The room around them continued with the low hum of activity, the rustling of papers, the soft murmur of conversation, but she felt a moment of peace and clarity, as if the world had momentarily slowed down to honor this simple, human act of inclusion. She noticed how even a small gesture, offered without expectation of recognition, could build trust and a sense of belonging that was far more valuable than any attention or praise. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her notebook resting open in front of her, and felt a deep sense of connection, not just to the cubs beside her, but to the idea of empathy and human kindness itself. This small act, she realized, had not only brightened her day, but also reminded her that the world can hold unexpected allies, people who may act quietly, thoughtfully, and generously, creating bonds that leave a lasting impression far beyond the brief moment of gesture. And in that moment, the human understood the true meaning of inclusion, gratitude, and connection, feeling both honored and uplifted by the gentle, caring attention of the three cubs, who had changed her day in ways she would never forget. The incident in the lecture hall stayed with her long after the day had ended, replaying in her mind like a quiet, powerful reminder of the unexpected ways kindness can appear. She thought about the moment she had entered the crowded room, filled with anxiety and hesitation, feeling invisible and unsure of where she belonged. And then she remembered the small, deliberate gestures of the three cubs who had noticed her struggle without being asked. That memory brought a deep sense of clarity. Even when the world feels cold or indifferent, there are moments when unexpected allies show up to offer support in ways that may be quiet, subtle, or almost invisible to others. She realized that kindness is not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it comes in the small, thoughtful actions that require attention, care, and understanding, like shifting a backpack, moving a notebook, or offering a silent, reassuring glance. These acts, she understood, carry far more meaning than grand gestures or public declarations, because they are genuine and attentive, designed to meet someone's real need without seeking recognition or reward. The woman reflected on how much those small gestures had shifted her day from anxiety and discomfort to inclusion and confidence, and she understood that human connection is often built through these careful, unspoken acts rather than through dramatic efforts. She also realized that support, true and meaningful support, often arrives from unexpected places, from people who might seem quiet, unassuming, or even ordinary, but who notice, who care, and who are willing to act when it matters most. That day, the cubs had become her allies, in the truest sense, offering a sense of belonging and reassurance that no one else had thought to provide. And she felt a quiet gratitude for the lesson they had taught her without even speaking a word. She understood that noticing others, offering small acts of care, and being aware of the struggles around us can create a ripple effect that reaches far beyond a single moment, shaping someone's confidence, sense of value, and perception of the world. The memory of that simple act Thoreau cleared, the subtle gestures, the warmth of eyes that recognized her meant with her as a guiding principle. A reminder that human kindness does not need to be announced or rewarded to be powerful. She thought about how she could carry this lesson forward in her own life, in her interactions with others, striving to notice, to respond, and to create moments of quiet care that could transform someone else's day, even when she faced difficulties or felt overlooked in the future. She knew that unexpected support could appear, and that sometimes the most meaningful acts of help are the ones given in silence, with intention, and with genuine awareness. That day, she learned that empathy, attentiveness, and human connection often matter more than any recognition or applause, and that even the smallest gestures of kindness can leave an imprint that lasts far longer than anyone could anticipate. From that day forward, the story of the three cubs who had cleared a row of seats for the human trainee, spread quietly but steadily among her peers, shared in whispered conversations, recounted in passing, and remembered by those who had witnessed or heard about the small, thoughtful act. It became more than just a tale about a lecture hall. It became a symbol of empathy, human kindness, and the power of noticing others in moments of need. People began to talk about how sometimes the simplest gestures, done without expectation of recognition or reward, can make someone feel truly seen, valued, and supported. And the story served as a gentle reminder that inclusion does not always arrive with fanfare. Often it comes through small, intentional actions that communicate care and understanding. She herself remembered every detail vividly: the careful shifting of notebooks, the subtle nudges of backpacks, the patient, encouraging glances, and each memory brought a sense of warmth and gratitude that remained with her long after the lecture had ended. She realized that what had seemed like a small kindness in the moment had left a lasting impression, not only on her own confidence and sense of belonging, but on the culture of awareness among her peers. Others began to notice, in their own ways, the importance of looking out for someone who might feel left out, overlooked, or unsure, and the cub's actions inspired quiet, thoughtful acts throughout the lecture hall and beyond. It became a story she shared with new trainees, in informal conversations or in moments of reflection, always emphasizing the power of intention and attentiveness in helping others feel included. The narrative also reminded her that human kindness is contagious. One thoughtful act can ripple outward, influencing behaviors, attitudes, and interactions in ways that are often subtle but deeply meaningful. She realized that empathy is not measured by grand statements or dramatic displays. It is measured by attention, patience, and the willingness to act for someone else's well-being, even in ways that go unnoticed by most. As the story circulated, it created a quiet culture of support, a small but growing awareness that noticing someone's struggle and acting with care can change a person's day or even their outlook entirely. Looking back, she understood that the day in the lecture hall had become more than a personal experience. It had transformed into a shared lesson about community, compassion, and the importance of human connection. The cub's thoughtful gestures remained a lasting reminder that everyone has the power to make someone feel welcome, included, and appreciated, even through actions that are small, silent, and seemingly ordinary. Over time, the story became a touchstone for kindness, showing that even in crowded, busy spaces, human beings have the ability to notice, to care, and to act in ways that leave lasting positive impressions. She carried this lesson forward into her own life, inspired to extend the same empathy and awareness to others. And she knew that the story of those 3 cubs would continue to inspire acts of quiet, meaningful kindness for years to come, proving that the simplest gestures can indeed make the deepest difference.